Hello and welcome back to the Fireside Lit Book Club, a quiet, candlelit corner of the internet where we read slowly, think deeply, and speak authentically about our experiences. I'm Lindsay, and I invite you to join me by the fire as we explore the soul of a book, the beauty it reveals, the questions it asks, and the ways it helps us understand life, identity, and meaning just a little more clearly. I want to take a moment to just wish all of my listeners a very happy new year and invite you to season 2 of Fireside Lit. Very, very excited to be launching into this season, especially just because, it gives me a little spark of inspiration in an otherwise very bleak time of year for me. Winter has historically been just a season I've always hated. I have found January, February, and even March to just be dreary, cold months. I typically don't get much out of those months, but I've been trying to just lean into the rest and solitude that these last several weeks have allowed for, with extra tea, coziness, and of course, reading. And as I mentioned in my season 1 finale, this has been a season thus far of discovering Greek tragedy. And I was actually so surprised to find that I am really, really enjoying these works. They are much more readable than I thought they would be, with extremely rich themes and parallels to future cultural and literary devices. I always find that drawing parallels between a book and real life or other books is an easy and fun way to immerse yourself more fully in that world and to really develop an appreciation for it that lingers. That was exactly my experience with Prometheus Bound by Aeschylus, which I chose as the first text in my 2026 reading project. I fully planned to read it slowly, and then I didn't. I finished it in one day across 2 sittings because it pulled me in completely. There was so much depth, so much symbolic and moral weight that I just couldn't step away. And I think the reason it pulled me in so completely wasn't just the story or the language. It was the sense that I had seen this before. As I was reading, I kept having this uncanny feeling of recognition, as though the moral structure of the play was already familiar to me. And that recognition, I realized, actually came from the Bible. So before getting into Prometheus himself, I want to talk about the striking and unsettling overlap between this ancient Greek tragedy and the Christian story of the crucifixion. What startled me wasn't that Aeschylus sounds Christian, it's that Christianity actually sounds tragic in a very Greek way, as this play was written nearly 500 years before Christ. But Aeschylus isn't prefiguring Christianity so much as Christianity later absorbs tragic structures that already existed in Greek thought. So we are introduced to Hephaestus, who binds Prometheus to the cliff, not because he wants to, but because Zeus has commanded it. Zeus is the ruler of the gods, he's the king of the gods, and he has unlimited, unbridled power. What he says goes in all cases. So Hephaestus is conflicted, reluctant, yet obedient. And that dynamic immediately reminded me of Pontius Pilate, this figure caught between conscience and authority. As another similarity, we also get the chorus of women gathered at the hero's side, weeping, witnessing his suffering, just as the women did at Christ's side on the way to Calvary. Similarly, Prometheus is bound, his body stretched and exposed to the elements, left to suffer publicly because he gave fire to mortals. And fire exists here as knowledge, evolution, civilization itself. That alone echoes the biblical narrative of the fall, the pursuit of knowledge punished because perfect knowledge belongs only to God. But Prometheus defies that boundary anyway. He gives fire to humanity because he loves them. Does that sound familiar to any Christians in the audience? And for that, he is condemned to eternal suffering, chained to a cliff where an eagle comes each day to devour his regenerating liver. Zeus does not kill him because Prometheus possesses prophecy, knowledge Zeus himself needs in order to preserve his power. The punishment is deliberate and theatrical. Prometheus's immobilization mirrors Roman execution logic: shame, exposure, and visibility. Crucifixion and binding both function as didactic punishment. This is what happens when you challenge power. Prometheus even says, "I spared mankind from going, broken, to the depths of Hades. I put men first in pity, and then found there was none left for me." That line right away struck me as eerily reminiscent of Psalm 69. I looked for some to take pity, but there was none. And there are other moments that feel almost uncannily parallel. For instance, behold the sight in the text reminded me of behold the man. The clash of the gods seems to recall the fall of the angels, and Zeus's self-made laws echo divine commandments. And when Hermes asks Prometheus, where is your rescue? It's hard not to hear, save yourself and come down from the cross. So if any of you are also familiar with the Christian tradition, you'll have to let me know in the comments whether this is just me reading into, all of these parallels. Obviously, the Christian tradition, as I mentioned, came 500 years after this myth, after this play. But just for me, it's probably just a result of my super Catholic background, but literally with each line I was reading, I was like, okay, another biblical text, another biblical reference. And then I was like, wait, it doesn't make sense, because obviously there was really no scripture to pull from here. So super interesting. I was super immersed in what I was reading, mostly just because I recognized it so well. With all of that said, Prometheus diverges sharply from Christ. This is not the same story, and this becomes very clear several pages into the tragedy, because Prometheus will not submit. Zeus sends Hermes, the messenger, to persuade him, to threaten him, to reason with him even, but Prometheus refuses to reveal what he knows unless he is released, no matter what further suffering awaits him. Hermes accuses him of being stubborn, of basically cutting off his nose to spite his face, but Prometheus does not yield. And this refusal isn't petulance, it's actually ideological. And in the Christian tradition, refusal to submit is viewed as prideful, even demonic, because it was the very first sin, not just for humankind, but for the angels as well, as this refusal is precisely what led to Lucifer's descent into hell and into the figure of Satan. So here, we see these two ideologies juxtaposed. Zeus wants a universe ordered by fear, compliance, and basically ignorance, just this rigid hierarchy governed by tyranny. And Prometheus insists on justice, agency, evolution, and knowledge. He believes suffering should not be absolute or permanent. And here's what I find so striking. Prometheus does not believe suffering purifies. He does not see pain as redemptive. He doesn't believe that endurance equals virtue. He never suggests that his suffering makes him better, more moral, or more enlightened. Instead, it's just that he refuses to let it make him false. And that's where I think he becomes more psychologically recognizable to us than the historical figure of Jesus, or at least to me. Prometheus doesn't accept suffering as meaningful simply for the fact that it exists. He endures it only because submission would require him to lie about what he believes is just. And this is something I deeply, deeply align with in my own life as sort of a natural byproduct or extension of my personality. I have this almost an obsession of sorts with needing authenticity, needing to, align myself with and live in truth that I feel in my heart of hearts is right. I have always on some level struggled with authority because so often it seems that authority keeps you bound, no pun intended there, to obligatory beliefs or practices by leveraging fear. I know a lot of people actually view fear as good and necessary. I think these are the types of people who are very attracted to and even governed by tradition, whereas I personally only view fear as good and necessary if it protects, not threatens. Your decisions for your life, the core of what makes you who you are, what you stand for, what you believe, should not really be informed by authority figures or institutions. And if they are, it should ideally be because you find beauty and truth and meaning in that source of authority or in the institution. Because when you think about it, any good act we perform that is motivated by fear is not actually inherently good at all. It's merely survival. And so how good can it actually be, right? But this is also where the play complicates that position and where it becomes much harder to sit comfortably in Prometheus's defiance alone. Because Aeschylus doesn't allow resistance to be the only path that leads to suffering. He introduces a figure who does not resist at all, who does everything, quote, right, and who is nevertheless destroyed. And that figure is Io. Io is a mortal princess with a tragedy of her own. She has been cursed by Hera, Zeus's wife, to suffer incessant torment from a gadfly that drives her endlessly across the earth, never allowing her to stop, never allowing her to rest. Her suffering isn't the result of rebellion or defiance, it's the result of simply having been seen. Hera's cruelty toward Io comes not because Io has done anything wrong, but because Zeus has set his sights on her. The desire is entirely one-sided. Io does not pursue Zeus, she does not provoke him, she is simply, unfortunately, chosen, and that is enough to destroy her life. And this is where one of the most difficult questions in the play emerges, the question of agency versus innocence, of guilt versus victimhood. Io is innocent and she suffers anyway. When the chorus witnesses Io's torment, they try to comfort themselves by imagining a rule that would protect them. They say, and this is quoted from lines 901 to 906, "If my marriage is on equal terms, I've nothing to fear. Let not the passion of powerful gods cast inescapable eyes on me. That's a war that can't be fought." So it's a deeply human response, the impulse to believe that if we just stay within the boundaries, if we play by the rules, if we make all the right choices, we'll be safe. But Io stands right there as proof that this isn't quite true. Terrible things happen all the time beyond our control, and even if we do everything right, as Io did, harm can still befall us. Innocence is not armor. Obedience is not protection. You can be destroyed without transgression. And what's especially devastating here is the contrast the play draws between Io and Prometheus. Prometheus resists and suffers. Io submits and suffers. The suffering doesn't distinguish between rebellion and compliance. It doesn't reward innocence. It doesn't function as a moral indicator at all. Io proves something that's very hard for many people to accept. Obedience does not prevent suffering. It only makes it quieter. And this is why Prometheus Bound is such a difficult play to sit with, because it refuses to comfort us. There's no reassurance that endurance will be rewarded, no promise that suffering will be redeemed, no guarantee even that justice will arrive in time or at all. Prometheus does not submit and he suffers. Io submits and she suffers. Ultimately, Christianity offers a framework in which suffering is redeemed through submission, where pain is given meaning through obedience, sacrifice, and trust in divine justice. And Prometheus Bound offers something very different. It dignifies suffering through refusal. It suggests that moral integrity may come at a terrible cost, and that the cost does not make integrity less true. Prometheus refuses to say what he knows to be false, even if doing so would end his pain. He does not believe suffering purifies him. He only insists that it does not erase him. And so the play leaves us with an unbearable question, one it never answers for us. If submission brings peace but costs truth, and resistance preserves truth but guarantees pain, which is the moral act? I would love to hear from you in the comments about which ideology you find yourself aligning with and relating to more. The Christian ideal of submission to achieve peace, or Prometheus's resistance to preserve truth. How have these played out in your lived experiences? Until next time, be well, stay cozy, and happy reading.